Thanks for having me. I am probably a little bit different than a lot of the speakers that you have in that I'm a geek. I'm not really a planner or anything, or a urban planner or anything like that, but I'm a technology guy, and that's why I wanted to talk to you a little bit about technology and a little bit about something that I care quite a bit about, which is public engagement. So I guess first, just a little bit about me. I typically describe myself as a passionate Edmontonian. I find that's like a simple, succinct way to try to capture all the things that I try to do and to get involved in the city. Some of those would be, for example, What the Truck. We're doing our planning for our 2014 season right now. So What the Truck is a food truck festival, and we do a series of events from May through September, and that's one of the things that I like to get involved in. Food is a big part of my life, partly because of my fiance who's a food blogger, but also because food brings people together. And if you're doing a public engagement event, or if you've been to one, usually you have food to draw people in, right? Even if it's just cookies or something like that, it always goes a little bit more smoothly when you've got food. My day job, I work for a company called Computing. We do assessment software, so computer web-based survey and assessment testing software. I run the product development team there. Most people don't know that I have a day job. They think that my blog and social media and everything else is my day job, but I actually do have something that pays the bills. My background is as a software developer, so I am able to write code and understand code, and I think sometimes that puts me at a distinct advantage over some of the other commentators, because I can quickly, code something up to try to find the answer to the question that I'm asking, depending on what's available. So I like to try and apply code when I can. For all of you who work at the City of Edmonton, don't worry. I'm not going to crap all over the efforts that you do. I've been pretty critical on my blog in the past about public engagement at the City of Edmonton, but I know there's some great work going on there and people doing great things, and I'm not here to trash anybody. I'm here to hopefully stimulate with some ideas around technology. So I think a good starting point is, what is public engagement? A bit of a definition, and so I pulled out two. And for me, being someone who cares a lot about Edmonton, I wanted to keep it somewhat Edmonton specific, so I'm sure you can go on Wikipedia and find a different definition. But for the City of Edmonton, one of the latest definitions that they provide through the corporate approach to public engagement, which is this new initiative at the city to try to reimagine how the city does engage citizens in decisions, I quite like. So they call it a broad approach to engaging citizens. It could be project or non-project based, ongoing conversations about municipal topics, market research, and strategic communication. So it's a pretty broad definition of public engagement, right? And I think if you went and asked the average Edmontonian what is public involvement or what is public engagement to you, they'd think probably more of the meeting that happens at 7 o'clock on Tuesday in a school gym somewhere, right? And they wouldn't think so much about some of the other things that this definition tries to capture. I really like this idea of an ongoing conversation about municipal topics, because it's not traditionally something that organizations like the city, for instance, have done when it comes to public engagement. So I'll come back to that. The second definition is actually my favorite, and I was fortunate enough to be asked to be part of NextGen's work group on coming up with an engagement strategy. So Edmonton NextGen, for those of you who don't know, is a sort of arm's-length organization at the city which tries to engage youth 18 to 40 years old in their city. And one of the things they tried to do was develop an engagement strategy around that. So NextGen tries to engage youth ages 18 to 40, and they pulled together this working group to look at engagement. And we looked at engagement pretty broadly, not just, how does the City of Edmonton engage people when they're doing a project, but how do we get people actively engaged in their communities? Like, how do we get people to care about their city? And so that's why I really like, the definition that we came up with, which is around engaging citizens of Edmonton to actively participate in building, to contribute to and to enjoy their city. It's a much broader thing than just, what do you think about this project we're doing? It's how can we have you be an involved member of growing the city that we all live and work in. What does public engagement look like? As I mentioned, I think this is usually what it looks like for people. You've got, probably a gym or some sort of dungeon room somewhere. I'm a huge fan of natural light. I love the windows in here. I think it inspires creativity and helps people have a positive outlook on what they're doing. And so I've always wondered why most public engagement events take place in like the darkest, dungeness looking places. You know, usually you've got a speaker who's going to go through some slides, and often the slides can be pretty dry. There's lots of text on those slides. And then usually there's some boards around the room where you can go and you can learn a bit more about the project, right? So, you know, for a long time when I thought about public engagement, this is really what I thought of, and I think it's what a lot of people think of. Sometimes you get to go to public engagement sessions that are a little bit more interesting than that. So this is one that I believe was done on open government, civic hacking and open government. So you know, you break into small groups, and maybe there's some flipboards up on the wall, and people are taking notes, and you know, maybe you do .democracy, where you walk around and you put a sticker on each of the ideas that you like the best. So you kind of do this like in-person voting. And fortunately, this one had windows, right? And sometimes it's a combination. So this is also from a public engagement I went to on open government when the city was a little bit more active in engaging people around the open data catalog and the work that they were doing there. And it's a combination, right? So they had a speaker who came in, did a bit of a lecture style thing. People broke into groups. We did this sort of workshop idea throughout the day. So it was a little bit more fun, and there was more opportunity to engage in different ways, whether it's just learning or whether it's actually giving your opinion about something. But all of these things are still, you know, centered around being in person, right? Even if we use technology to some degree here, most of these engagements happen if you're in the room. And if you weren't in the room, there's not really an opportunity for you to understand what was said, to hear what was discussed, and also to provide your feedback. So I think, you know, technology can help us address that. Another example that often comes up when we talk about public engagement and technology is voting. So all of us do our taxes, and probably most of us now file them online. And if it's good enough to file our taxes online, why can't we vote online? Voting is like the most basic form of public engagement in a democracy like ours, right? If you do nothing else but you go and vote, you can say you're an engaged Edmontonian, right, to some degree. You know, last year the City of Edmonton looked at, our council more specifically looked at doing online voting, and they did do a public engagement process around this, which is really quite in-depth and well-developed. And they worked with the Centre for Public Involvement to bring a group of people, representative Edmontonians, together to discuss this topic. And their recommendation to council was that we should have online voting. I like telling this story because, you know, the cynic in me, the commentator in me feels like council voted against enabling online voting because they were afraid that some young guy who knows how to use technology, you know, like Don Iveson, would walk away with the election. And it's kind of funny that he walked away with the election voting on paper anyway. So I think that was kind of an interesting outcome. But you know, this is a good example. People think, well, why can't I go and vote online? I go and file my taxes online. I pay my bills online. I do everything else online. Why isn't technology helping me do the most basic form of engagement? So I think we can do better, and I think we can use technology to help, you know, change or improve some of the approaches that we take to public engagement. So I like to talk about Mayor Mendel a little bit, partially because on the one hand he publicly said some good things in favor of public engagement, and on the other hand was not always its biggest supporter. He often felt, I think, that public engagement processes got in the way of actually getting things done, and you know, he'd have some not so nice things to say about, you know, citizens like me who wanted to really stop and think about a particular project. But he did at the end of the day care what people thought. What citizens thought. He wanted them to be engaged. And so in his his swearing-in address from 2010, you know, he said, methods are changing, people contribute their opinions and receive information in different ways, and we are not keeping pace. So I think, you know, he and at least the people on his staff certainly recognize that with social media and the web and all, you know, everybody walking around with a phone in their pocket, all of these things mean that the way that we get information and the way that we want to interact with our governments is very different than it was, you know, 20 years ago. So, you know, to his credit, he made some statements about that and tried to push for that. I don't think enough happened while he was mayor, but he certainly set a good tone. And now, you know, like I said, there's lots of great work going on. So I look at his comment there as a really good touching off point, right? If we can do a better job and technology can help us do that, you know, what does that look like? So technology, right? Let's take technology to the rescue when we're talking about how we can improve public engagement. But first, I think there's some improvements we could make whether we're talking about online or offline public engagement. So what are those things? One of the things I think we should really think about is the vocabulary that we use. So, is it an open house? Is it an information session? Is it a public consultation? Is it a design charrette? Is it a survey? Is it a questionnaire? Like, what is it that you're promoting, and what is it that you're asking of me as a citizen to come and give you? Is it for me to come and just hear you talk so I learn more about a project? Or is it for me to come, having already gotten some information and trying to get informed and actually give you a feedback or a suggestion on something? And I think too often when the city and other organizations plan public engagement events, we don't make it clear what that looks like. So, for example, last week or 2 weeks ago, I went to a public, I don't even know what they called it, like an open house, I guess, or a public meeting, actually, I think is what it was, that the government of Alberta did, or the province of Alberta did, the Legislative Assembly more specifically, on high-speed rail. And I was like, oh, okay, a public meeting, this is fantastic. I can go and I can hear what other people are saying around high-speed rail in the province and maybe give some feedback. And when I got there, once I got through 3 different security guards, I found myself in a room full of MLAs who were talking amongst themselves and had speakers who had registered to give presentations, and then people sitting in the back like me just kind of listening. And so it wasn't clear to me when I first saw the opportunity online what was expected or what was possible at that event. And so I think some clearer vocabulary, for example, in that instance, could have really made a difference on how I perceived that public engagement. And if you're going to call it public, probably shouldn't have 3 security guards to get into the room, but that's just my opinion. Another thing I think we can really improve on, and something we need to think about when we're doing public engagement, is the stage that we're at. So the top picture is one that transportation at the City of Edmonton uses, and I think it's quite effective. It says strategy, concept, design, build, and operate, for those of you who can't read it. And it's meant to give you a sense of where we are in the project. So if you go to an open house today on LRT, for instance, there will likely somewhere be this diagram that you'll see, this little chart. And it's meant to give you an indication that, the strategy and the concept phases are done. There was public engagement opportunities as part of those stages, and what we're on today is design, for instance. And that's what we're talking about today. That's not always clear when we do public engagement, and it's not always clear, even if that is the case, what does that mean? Like what happened during the strategy and concept stages. So when LRT is talked about, for instance, people often come to a consultation, and what they want to talk about is where the train is going to go. But the corridor for the train was decided in a previous stage, right? But there's no good way for me, if I find out about an opportunity today to go and talk or learn more about LRT, there's no good way for me to find out what decisions have already been made, what should I come to the meeting already knowing, right? And I think we could do a much better job of that. And again, technology can really help that, right? We can make it easier to bring the information together about decisions that were made so that people do have a better understanding about where we are in the process. And it's about expectation setting, right? So when somebody comes into the room, the expectations are set correctly about what's going to happen and what kind of input they're going to be able to give. And then at the end of it as well, review. Like, one of the other things that's important around a public engagement effort is that if I'm going to give you some feedback, I want to know that something's happened to it. And if I can't, at some point in the future, see where my input was used or considered, it makes it much less likely that I'm going to want to participate again in the future, right? So I think that's an important consideration as well. Another thing that I think we could do a better job of online and offline is just context. So this is a map of the Valley Line LRT. If you go to edmonton.ca/Valley Line, this is the map you will see. In the context of that webpage, maybe that makes sense. But if I'm getting involved from a public engagement point of view, whether it's going to an online site that's been created to talk about it or to give ideas or to an in-person event, the LRT doesn't exist in a vacuum, right? There's lots of other projects that are happening around it. If the station's going out to Mill Woods, what else is happening in Mill Woods? What else is going on in Mill Woods Town Centre? If the LRT is coming down 102 Avenue, what else is happening downtown on 102 Avenue? What does that mean for the arena project or any of those other things that are happening alongside? I don't think we do enough of the context. And this goes back to that idea that all too often public engagement is really project focused rather than municipal issue focused or or provincial issue focused. So if we're talking about LRT more broadly, then you can include some of those other elements, whereas if you're talking just about that specific project, you kind of ignore everything else. downtown has this challenge right now, definitely. And I think the city of Edmonton recognizes it and is doing some work to try and address it. But downtown over the next couple of years is going to be ridiculous. It's already ridiculous if you live there because roads are closed all over the place and sidewalks are closed and signage is unclear. So what's going to happen when the arena is being built, maybe the Galleria is being built, the LRT work is being done, maybe preliminary design on the LRT, there's the Jasper Avenue New Visions project. So where do you go? How do you get around downtown as a driver, as a pedestrian, as a visitor? How do you take transit there? If we talk about the engagement opportunities or the projects more holistically, I think we can achieve a different result than if we just talk about them individually. If I go to an event and I talk about Jasper Avenue New Visions with the people working on that project, that's great, but it's part of a bigger thing, right? It feeds into the other projects that are going on, and too often I think we don't talk about that context. And then the last thing I'll say very quickly on sort of improvements that I think could happen both online and offline is, like I've mentioned a couple times now already, this idea that we do more broad strokes engagement. So, for example, the City of Edmonton, this is what I pay a lot of attention to, has dozens of opportunities at any given time on projects that are going on and things that they want to either tell the public about or things that they want to get feedback on. But why can't we have something more open-ended, something a little broader, like a town hall of sorts, where citizens can go and provide input on things or ask questions about things that there isn't really a proper home for in the project-based approach, right? And we can use technology to do this, things like a Google Hangout, for instance, where you can have a ton of people in the room, so to speak, at one time to be able to provide feedback and ask questions about a broad range of things. And maybe that helps us decide where we should be focusing more effort, in the future. I think elections are so interesting because that's where some of this stuff happens. Like Karen Leibovici, when she did her campaign, did a couple of, telephone town halls where she had, thousands of people call in and have the opportunity to ask questions. Or Don Iveson did a Reddit AMA. So Reddit is this online, news sharing community, and they have this thing called an AMA, which is an Ask Me Anything. And he did an AMA. So what that means is he goes on, he commits to an hour of time, and Reddit users can ask him anything they want. And he'll answer the questions to the best that he can in the amount of time that he's got. And you get some really, really interesting discussions that come out of that. So it's not focused on a specific project. It's a bit broader and a bit more open-ended. But I think you can get some pretty interesting results if you take that approach. So I don't think we should ignore project-based engagement. I just think there's opportunity and scope to use technology to include more broad strokes public engagement opportunities. Some technology that I think we should consider when it comes to public engagement. It might sound old, but email. Email is actually really, really effective. It's surprising how many people choose to get updates to my blog or to my partner's blog via email. They don't read it in the browser. They don't know what an RSS feed is because that's pretty geeky. But they do know how to get email, and so they plop in their email address, and they get, every time I do a new post, they get a post sent to them via email. You can do this with some of the projects at the city too. So this little box, I pulled off the LRT one yesterday as well. So if you want to get an email update every time something's happening with the LRT, you can go in here and sign up for this mailing list, which is great because now when they close 105th Street for the Nate line, or they're doing some sort of update on the progress, if you're interested and you want to be engaged as a citizen, you can get that information to come to you pretty easily. The challenge for somebody like me is, why would I want to sign up for like 100 of these things? I want to know about everything that's going on at the City of Edmonton, but I'm not going to hunt through thousands of web pages to find the 100 different sign-up boxes for the email lists. And then let's say I do sign up for a bunch of them. How can I then manage those subscriptions, right? What happens if I want to unsubscribe? Do I have to go to each individual one and unsubscribe? I think if we thought about email as a really effective tool for getting information out to people, maybe not getting feedback or suggestions in, but at least getting information out to people, there's a lot of really interesting things we could do with email.